Belgium. The European summit that's just opened is living up to its billing, it seems, some say with shades of 1984. That's when Margaret Thatcher told Brussels, "I want my money back." She sure did get it. She got a 66% rebate on the gap between what the UK pays in and what it got back. This Thursday, you saw him there, the British Prime Minister David Cameron, throwing down the gauntlet, saying he's not happy about plans to raise the EU's budget some 5% over the next 7 years. He's also fighting for Britain to maintain the rebate on dues that Thatcher secured. Now, in the build-up to the summit, the French president bemoaned those countries who come, as he put it, only to pick up their checks, rebates, and discounts. François Hollande targeting several nations who've taken their cue from Thatcher's playbook. But Britain is central to this conversation. What with the context of last month's backbench revolt in London, where 80 Conservatives crossed party lines and voted in favour of a bill to force a referendum on the UK's European membership. The bill failed, but is Britain just bluffing when it threatens to veto the EU budget? And in the long run, could it really sever ties with Brussels? Today in the France 24 debate, it's Cameron v. Europe. And with us to talk about it from London, Conservative Party backbencher Douglas Carswell. Thank you for being with us. From Brussels, we're joined by British Liberal Democrat member of the European Parliament, Graham Watson. Joining us here in France, from her home constituency in Montauban, in the southwest of the country, Socialist MP Valérie Rabault. Yves Bertoncini of Notre Europe, Jacques Delors' Public Policy Think Tank Institute, France 24 senior correspondent Melissa Bell, and France 24 business editor Marcus Carlson. Welcome to all of you. You can join us, by the way, on Facebook and Twitter, our handle at FrançoisF24. First off, let's listen to David Cameron. It's not "I want my money back," but it was a pretty firm statement he made arriving in Brussels this Thursday.
No, I'm not happy at all. These are very important negotiations. Clearly, at a time when we're making difficult decisions at home over public spending, it would be quite wrong, it is quite wrong, for there to be proposals for this increased extra spending in the EU.
Graham Watson, your party is in a coalition with David Cameron's Conservatives. Do you agree with this veto threat?
Well, I think everybody recognizes that we need to limit the European Union budget, just as we're having to limit national budgets. I think it's unlikely that David Cameron would actually use his veto, because he knows that it's not in our interests or anybody else's to have a complete breakdown in the talks. But I think that he is right to point out that there has to be agreement, there has to be a consensus, and that if a number of other countries want to go ahead with a 5% increase in the budget as proposed by the European Commission, then the United Kingdom is not going to be joining them. We're going to have to find a deal. David Cameron knows as well as anybody else that there has to be give and take in negotiations, and it may be that the deal is based on a restructuring of the budget, or moving money between certain budget headings.
Douglas Carswell, let me ask you, how do you predict this is going to go in Brussels?
Well, I don't know whether there'll be agreement or not. What I do know is that in England we have a system whereby the government money isn't really the government's money at all. It's the people's money, and Parliament sanctions whether or not government can use it. And Parliament has been very clear. It has said that there is to be no net increase in our EU budget contributions. In fact, there is to be a reduction. And for the first time in 40 years, we got a clear vote on this matter in the Commons. And I'm sure that David Cameron and the negotiators who act on behalf and are authorised to act by the British Parliament will reflect that in their negotiations. Let's see how it goes. But fundamentally, if no deal is reached, so what? It means we can, like normal people, discuss our budget deal-making every year, rather than give the European system a 7-year carte blanche to spend our money. I'm not particularly stressed by the fact that there may be no deal. Why not have a 12-month cycle for these negotiations? It would be pretty good.
Yves Bertoncini, do you agree? If there's no deal, so what?
Well, I suspect that it's better to keep on a pluriannual basis, because this type of commedia dell'arte we're attending would happen will happen every time, but it's better if it's not every year, because there's a lot of political energy spent for such debates around a budget which is very limited, 1% of GDP, but which creates every time huge debate and huge tension, even more in the present situation, because Europe is in crisis, not only the Eurozone country, by the way, but including the UK. So let's keep the pluriannual basis and let's have a deal. I suppose there will be a deal, if not this time, one month later, but for God's sakes, not every year.
All right, Graham Watson, your thoughts?
Well, I must say, as a member of the European Parliament who has to deal with these things every year, I could not agree more with that. We go through the same awful kind of race to the bottom every time. It would be much more sensible if our national leaders could agree on, let us say, either a percentage of gross national product that would form the basis of the European Union budget. Currently, it is just over 1% of GDP. It's very small in relation to other areas of government spending. But if there were a fixed percentage, that would help. If not, the government leaders could perhaps agree that the European Union could have a certain way of raising money in order to finance its own budget. What we do need to do is to give the European Union the money that it needs to give us the benefits that Europe can bring, such as, for example, combined efforts in science and technology, which are keeping our industries in the game.
All right, I know, Graham Watson, that you have other commitments, so I'm going to let you go. I hope next time you'll be able to join us for the full hour.
I'm okay for quite a while yet, if that's okay. I'm all right for at least another 15 minutes.
Oh, well, perfect. Stay with us till the bottom of the hour, please. You are more than welcome, sir. We're hearing the way this argument is unfolding, Marcus Carlson, as you crunch the numbers. Wherein lies the truth here?
Well, obviously, as we've been hearing, the EU's budget is just 1% of the European Union's full GDP each year. So economically, we're not talking about an awful lot of money, although, of course, we are talking of billions and billions of euros. But in the grand scheme of things, we're not talking about a massive amount of money for the European Union as a whole. So, as I say, the economic impact of there not being a deal is going to be limited at this stage. But it was interesting to hear from Douglas Carswell there in London that he says that if there is no deal, so what? Well, of course, there will be a political fallout. The European Union will look slightly ridiculous because it won't actually manage to get its house in order money-wise. Also, just Douglas, I want to ask you this. There are some people who say that if there is no deal, then the rebate will actually decrease, or Britain's rebate will actually decrease as the budget from 2013 will roll over into 2014. So it could actually mean that UK taxpayers will pay even more if there is no deal. What do you say to that?
Two specific things. First of all, I realise it might seem terribly inconvenient and rather pesky for people to have to, go to the trouble of asking for billions of pounds from the taxpayer every 12 months. But, most of your viewers have to run their lives on that basis. So, I don't think we should really put in place financial arrangements that suit the Euro system. I think we should recognise this is the people's money, and it's right and proper that we, go to all this trouble to discuss how much of it should be hoovered up by the Euro system. I think the argument that it's inconvenient for the politicians is a rather weak one. You then put forward the point that, if we have annual negotiations, somehow this could affect the rebate. Well, level with me. Does that mean to say that however we negotiate, we're going to be forced to part with more of our money? At a time of austerity, when I'm having to justify to my constituents cutbacks in public services, if you're really suggesting to me that we face a choice of paying more or being forced to pay more, please tell me so that I can level with the voters. And if that is the best we can do, it doesn't bode well for the bigger situation, which is whether or not David Cameron will be able to renegotiate Britain's relationship with Europe. If we can't make progress on this issue of the budget, it doesn't augur well for those who claim that they can renegotiate Britain's position in Europe. I mean, I happen to be someone who wants Britain to withdraw from the European Union entirely. The fact that you're saying we can't get a better deal rather strengthens my hand.
All right, before we talk about Britain's relationship with Europe, let's just finish the discussion about what's going on in Brussels. France 24's Europe editor Christophe Robit is following the negotiations. I know he's got the coffee on hand for what could be a long night. I know the German Chancellor even said that this could drag on. I mean, you may not get closure this weekend. Christophe, the week began with the Financial Times reporting on its front page that EU nations were secretly preparing a budget that does without the British. Are we still in that frame of mind at this point?
Not yet at this stage, I must say, François. All I can tell you is that leaders haven't yet met all together around the table. David Cameron arrived this morning. He had a bilateral meeting with the president of the Council, Herman Van Rompuy. Meanwhile, Merkel and Hollande have arrived. They are both sat in a room trying to see whether they can find a compromise. But at this stage, the hope is yet to put everybody around the table and try and see whether a compromise is in reach. But as you said, we're bracing ourselves for a very long night, potentially a long weekend. It's quite unusual for the council here to tell us, look guys, be ready to book a hotel room for Friday or Saturday night. This is no longer impossible. But indeed, we'll have to see what happens when everybody gets together, because at this particular moment, what we see here in Brussels is that there are two big groups. One group led by Britain, but in which you also have France and Germany, who says, look, the proposal put forward by the EU Commission is unrealistic. We can't increase our budget by 5%. Now, within this group, we have a lot of contradictions, of course. Britain, very extreme in saying we will veto anything beyond freeze. France and Germany, more pragmatic, but still saying we need to spend less. Facing this group, we have the so-called group of cohesion led by Poland. Now, these countries, mostly from Central and Eastern Europe, rely very heavily on EU subsidies, and they don't want to see a decrease in the budget. Quite the contrary, they say. Now we have a crisis. We need your money even more than before because we are facing new problems at home.
All right, Christophe Rabit, that certainly paints the picture of who is on what side. I want to thank you. Melissa Bell, just one word quickly here. We've seen the relationship between Britain and Europe wax and wane. When you hear the tone, though, the way this fight is being pitched, is it really unprecedented at this point?
It's something we come across every 7 years, and it's interesting to look back at the press cuttings of last time these things were negotiated back in 2005. Tony Blair gave up 20% of the famous rebate. When you consider that in today's context, it seems an extraordinary concession. What's actually changed is that, yes, we have a row every time. Yes, these things are unseemly. Yes, they're a way to vent political anxieties and political differences. They're not actually about money. We're not talking about a great deal of money. The economist, a British economist, has worked out that the amount that we're looking at, when you consider even the Commission proposal, which is fairly high compared to what the British are proposing, you're talking something in the order of 0.03% of the EU GDP, which is the equivalent of the average taxpayer in Britain paying the duty on about half a gallon of petrol per year. It's nothing in financial terms. What we're talking about is a huge political row, and what's changed this time compared to the previous times is the gap that has emerged between many members of the EU who have come to the conclusion that given the financial crisis, what is needed is more Europe, and the British, who are ever more convinced, ever more clearly, that actually what is needed is less Europe. This time, David Cameron is faced with a party which is very different to the one that Tony Blair faced back in 2005. Even the Conservative Party at the time was divided between Eurosceptics and Europhiles. Today, it is Eurosceptics and those who want to leave the EU altogether. What David Cameron has behind him is a really tough party to manage when it comes to Europe. So this man who came to power urging the Conservatives not to be divided, not to be obsessed with Europe, is having himself to face this very difficult issue. And the gap between where the EU is headed and where Britain is retreating has never been wider.
All right, and Valérie Rabault, let me ask you, would you say, listening to the discussion and the way that Melissa Bell just framed it, that this is kind of a symbolic measure, much like when the French ministers freeze their pay?
Sorry, I did not hear you.
I was asking, when you look at the amounts of money which are being haggled over, would you agree that they're small, even symbolic?
No, I agree with what has been said before, that the budget represents around 1% of GDP for Europe, which is at least, it's a big amount of money, but it's not that much. And what was interesting in the debate I've just hearing just now is that no one says that we should discuss about growth. Because if we have a budget, we need to discuss for what? What do we want to do with this money? Where do we want to invest? And I think that it's what is missing in the current debate. It's that we need to assess some targets for Europe, economic targets, and the first one on which France is insisting quite now is growth. We need to define what are the key drivers for growth and where do we need to put the money on it. And I think to discuss budget without targets is a little bit misleading, and that we need to really assess both together. And I agree with what also has been said before and what has been said also by our minister, Mr. Cazeneuve, for European Affairs, is that maybe we need to have, or to start to have for Europe own resources. He was taking as example the tax on financial transaction. This could be a first step, but maybe if we want to avoid each time this discussion on budget, everyone is putting that and that, maybe we could start with having for Europe its own resources.
Let me ask Douglas Carswell what he thinks of that. Douglas, what do you think of the idea of basically the Europe raising its own revenue?
I think
people.
those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. I mean, the idea that Europe spending money creates prosperity is insane. If that was the case, then Greece, which has received vast spondoodles of euro money over the years, would be floating on a sea of prosperity. In fact, it is absolutely bankrupt. I mean, the idea that we should give yet more money to the euro system that created this madness, that has impoverished and reduced to poverty millions of Europeans, is a form of collective insanity.
Valérie Rabault and then Yves Bertoncini.
Yes. What I was saying is that maybe to start to have a part of the Euro budget based on own resources, not the whole budget, but a part of it.
We've given with respect, we've given the euro system control over a common currency. It has produced disaster. We have given it control over common fisheries policy. There are no fish. The idea that we should give it control over its own resources is a recipe for stagnation and disaster. As I said, it's a form of collective insanity. Europe needs to wake up and realize that more Europe is the problem. It is not the solution.
But I'm sorry. I think Europe is the solution.
All right,
it's not the problem at all. And I don't agree with you.
Melissa Bell.
I don't agree with you when you explain that the euro would be the problem. I don't agree with that.
Well, best of luck with that. Best of luck with that.
Absolutely never been wider, and it shows in the exchange we just heard. We'll be back, and I promise we'll get to Yves Bertoncini. This is the France 24 debate.